I guess you didn't expect me to be in this background, but courtesy of my flight being delayed and I'm gonna be stuck in China for 2 days, I couldn't upload the regular video. So instead we're doing something we've done a few times when I can't hit these bi-weekly uploads. I'm gonna be uploading a Patreon video. So if you don't know, I'm gonna plug it now because goddammit, I need the money to survive here in China. We have a Patreon. We upload an extra video every week and then also once a month a full business financial overview where we talk a bit more in depth about certain topics like you're gonna see in this video. So I hope you enjoy this video, and if you like this more unedited, raw, unfiltered style of content, then definitely I urge you to check out the Patreon. There's a lot of amazing value on there, over 70 videos at this point, and you're helping us keep this studio afloat even in my times of crises. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
I have this confession to make where, despite calling myself a game developer for over 3 years at this point, Jesus Christ. Despite calling myself a game developer for over 3 years at this point and having decent success, you know, I actually am not a good developer. And what I mean by this is the programming aspect. It's something I've talked about before, where I went to school for computer science, but I didn't specialize in programming. I got my programming classes, but I was all about like systems and network administration, whatever boring stuff, doesn't really matter. I was the worst programmer out of the ByteMe Games team, so I've always been like pushed away of like, hey, look, I was bad at this. So it's not like, oh, they kept me from my beautiful talents and whatever. My code was just way worse than what they were doing. They were much better trained at it. I never really programmed a lot. And it's something that kind of nagged on me a little bit of like, you know, I was stuck too much is I think how all of this came together of like, I genuinely didn't know how to write a line of code for Unity. There were so many things I didn't understand what Thomas and William's code base was. If I wanted something done, I had to be like, hey, Thomas, pretty please, can you make this button go and do something or whatever? And that was kind of it. I had enough stuff to do basically because I still had a lot of YouTube videos to make. I still have a lot of assets to do, level design, managing them, whatever, like when we had the interns. I never really had that need of, okay, I need to learn how to program more. But something that changed in December, I would say, like November, December, is I'm getting better at making these videos. And genuinely, it doesn't take that much time anymore. And especially then when I combine that with batching up videos. So I just for like 1 week, I'm like, don't talk to me. I'm gonna make videos. And then I have like 3 weeks off like making videos and I can focus on game dev. This bottleneck kept getting more and more clear of, look, I can't really be as helpful as I would like to be because I simply don't understand enough about how to code in Unity. And it's an issue that probably I should deal with. And I finally had the option to deal with because of, hey, I have more time. So what did I do? Because this was a very long intro, I guess. I started learning programming, and more specifically, I started to apply it, and I started learning programming with the focus on prototyping because we have burnt ourselves so many times at this point. With Guild Architect, for example, this was something where this disconnect was very clear because Songs of Everjade and Guild Architect were both games, and I think Skogvold as well, where, I mean, all of our games basically, I came up with the idea. I am the idea guy of ByteMe Games for the most part. I think, yeah, also Overtime Anomaly, Magical Girl Guardians, basically were all my original visions because Thomas, his ideas are questionable sometimes. And when William, this wasn't like William, he also did part of Guild Architect, but whatever. Problem remains, I came up with the idea, but I was never the person who implemented that idea. And it was such a bottleneck also because the prototyping stage, if we did one, was just me giving a list of requirements to Thomas and then a lot of back and forth ping pong because he had to program something. And if you've ever programmed something with 2 people, you know that it's never like an easy way to figure out what the other person actually wants. So we just generally never prototyped well. We just had an idea and we're like, sure, we'll go with this. And I kept working on that. And I realized that, okay, if I learn programming, I can do something really powerful. I can prototype because this was perfect for me as well. Because I know that even though I can write some code, and thank God for ChatGPT and DeepSeek and Lusha and every single other AI model that there is under the sun at this point, I know to a certain degree how to make things work. But I know also that, look, the code I'm gonna be writing, it's not gonna be pretty. I just wanna learn, is this a fun gameplay loop? What if Thomas gets hit by a bus tomorrow? Or more realistically, what if Thomas, who now has a girlfriend, one day decides, you know what, actually ByteMe Games, screw it, I'm out. I don't want all of our development power to just disappear basically. I want to have kind of that backup worst case, I don't think we'll need this, of if really need be, I could kind of keep going. Like, yeah, sure, I couldn't do as much YouTube and whatever, but I could still make something. That was kind of my New Year's resolution. And this led into me actually learning a bit more about how Unity works and prototyping. And I've made 3 prototypes in the last month, 3 different game ideas and things I've learned from that. And I want to talk a bit more about that as well. Like, how has that experience been for me? Because I already knew game development, everything around game development. I knew the core concepts of game design, of how to do your level design and all of that. It was just integrating all of that and making the mechanics that was the new part for me. And I think by especially having that link now between me being the person who gets the game idea and the one who implements it, so I can really rapidly in like 5 minutes time change my prototype, change my idea that I had, has been really powerful. And I mean, one of our prototypes is right now in development. We have some more that are like, hey, maybe one day we'll do this, maybe not. And I want to talk about that because also, you know me, let's be honest, you know I drive on spite. And this also started, it's like the one thing was like, okay, it was something that I had on my list for a long time if I want to learn programming. What actually triggered me to be like, fuck it, I'm gonna learn it now, is I had that period in December where I had a backlog for a few weeks. I didn't have to worry too much about writing code, and I was like, okay, what do I do now? And then Samyam, another game dev YouTuber, she released a video about, hey, we've been working on our game Desktop Cat Cafe, and it took 9 months, and the game almost was like unable to be made. And I was like, you gotta be shitting me. 9 months for this? I bet my ass could make a better game in less time if and I hadn't even programmed. And that's exactly what I did. In, I would say, 2-3 days, I made my own little like desktop, like True Idler seems to be the genre that's called. It's like games like Rusty's Retirement, for example, and Desktop Cat Cafe, where you just have a little city or something sitting at the bottom of your screen that you slowly build up. And in my case, I was like, okay, I want to have something, because I looked at what assets do I have. I was like, I'm going to just have ships, and they are going to be sailing around at the bottom of your screen. Maybe I have some footage of this. If I have, I'll see if I can throw it up now. And I made that in 3 days. And okay, sure, it wasn't beautiful, but it had that core, because I could really prototype quickly. And I knew a little bit about Unity of like, hey, how did Thomas, like, where would they put their scripts again? What is our folder structure, whatever? I didn't go from 0, but I got from, well, a pretty low floor, let's say, to actually making something. And the first big, beautiful thing that immediately helps with this is that, okay, I thought it was a good idea. And then I made it, and by actually looking at it and prototyping like we say you should do, but we just honestly didn't do before, I realized very quickly, oh my god, this is a dumb idea. I would rather just drag my nuts in glass than try to market this game, because it's not a great marketing. Like the Desktop Cat Cafe can work because it had pretty good art and it was cats, but I don't see the True Idler genre working for boats, like pirate ships, whatever. It was a cool idea, it was a good intro, but I was like, okay, yeah, this probably isn't going to be it. So I did what any good prototype should be done, and I just shelved it. I uploaded our GitLab, and that's it, basically. It's just sitting there now. But then I started thinking, okay, how can I take this further? Because I still had some more time. This was like those few days between Christmas and New Year where nothing really happens. Everyone is just like taking vacation, or they're like too like filled with like going to family dinners and all of that. That honestly, once again, we had time. I had time. So I think in another 3 or 4 days, I made that first proof of concept version for my virtual friends. The desktop, once again, I kept in the idler genre because I knew this is a pretty relatively easy genre to make a simple prototype for, because I was still learning. Like, we'll get to more complicated prototypes in a second as well. And I threw that together with the assets once again we had lying around from Magical Girl Guardians, and I was like, how hard can it be, right? So I made something together in 4 days, and I was like, okay, I'm going to actually see this completion. I'm gonna throw up a Steam page for it, and we'll see how it goes. Whether Thomas picks it up, that wasn't really something we considered, or it was going to be one of my side projects, which looking back was kind of a dumb idea, because I really didn't need any more side projects at that point. It was something that I did look into and was like, okay, this is honestly pretty solid, and I could see that, hey, there's more potential here. That's kind of what we got, as well as I submitted that prototype into like a demo day from the 4chan Game Developer Guild, and those guys hate the living guts out of me, but even they're like, yeah, the game, there's not much, and I knew this because it was 4 days in, but I got a lot of good feedback. But they couldn't fault it on the visuals or the general hook. Like, yeah, there wasn't enough to do, but there seemingly wasn't anything blatantly horrible, miserable about the game. I got some really good feedback on that. And once again, I did what kind of prototypes should do. I just took a step back from it. I shelved it. I got back to working on Magical Girl Guardians and Overtime Anomaly. And I just waited. There was some drama about Steam. It took a whole month for Steam to approve that store page. Holy shit, that was pain and suffering, but we've got through it. The store page is up right now, and I think we're hovering near 100 plus wishlists at this point for, you know, a prototype. It's not great. I've talked about it in the business overview, but still pretty cool. And I didn't stop there. Like, I took a few weeks off because, you know, I needed to do real work again. I needed to record more videos. I needed to do other stuff. But in that period, I got some more game ideas, and I learned, okay, hey, I can write them out. Something I really good, by the way, like, I'm trying it out right now. I don't know if I would actually suggest it, and probably there's some AI bro in the watching this who has a way better solution. One thing I really like is the voice partner, like voice inputs for ChatGPT, where I just, if I go and I want to do something and I have to cook or do the dishes or whatever, I put in my earbuds and I just talk to it for 20, 30 minutes about, hey, I have this potential game idea, can you help me further refine it? And then after, like, I've done my entire conversation, because I had this one idea and I refined it with them. I don't know, what's the pronoun for ChatGPT? I don't know, honestly. Once I refined the idea a bit more with it, I was like, okay, can you just give me a summary game design document and then I can look at it later. And once again, I was like, okay, can I prototype this? So I set myself once again a 3-day timeline, because once again I had like 3 days off, or like not off but reduced workload. I could genuinely take a little bit of time and crunk something together as fast as I could. And that's how we got the prototype of To the Peak, Journey to the Peak, something like that. Basically, once again, I was like, hey, I have this idea for a physics-based like rage game, streamer-based game, whatever you want to call it. Let me see, can I actually make this work relatively easily? The whole concept was that, okay, how I explain it, the hook is, you know, if you've ever played Skyrim, there's that quest basically where you have to climb up the throat of the world to go to the monastery. I forgot from who. And I have PTSD of that because it's just such a long ass climb and it just keeps on going. And like, okay, can I do something with that? Where you have to climb a mountain and you have like this big unruly cart behind you and it's filled up with like physics-based rigid body stuff that you have to bring. And there's like some little towns along the way climbing up the mountain, and you get more and more stuff, and you get like a goat that you need to take care of. The idea sounded pretty fun. But now, instead of me going to Thomas and be like, hey Thomas, what do you think about this idea? And then, can you make it? I could just make it myself, which I did. And I did definitely still struggle because holy shit, physics and rigid bodies in Unity is a bit of a pain. But I got everything working. I had like a little character controller. I had like this side view. Once again, I should be able to put up some gameplay footage of it. And I got the core physics done. And something I did now as well that I didn't do in the 2 previous prototypes is, because this was a game, the first one where really mechanics were the core. The previous 2 ones was just, okay, can I make something? Now I got into the progress, okay, I had a bit more of an understanding how does Unity work and all of that. Let's focus more on some mechanics. So I made the mechanics using Synthi assets, and then I was like, okay, but if we want to prototype this correctly, we don't just make one idea, but we look at different approaches. So what I then did is I reskinned that exact same game as a PBR, so like a high poly, kind of like Unicycle Pizza Time look. And how does this look? I think this is honestly a really good prototype I did, because I managed to stick in the 3-day time period. At the end of the 3-day time period, I gave the build to both Thomas and William, and they could just select the button like low poly or PBR, and they could try it out for themselves. And it was very basic, but there was a basic timer in it, there was a basic objective in it, and there were some basic obstacles in it. They got the idea of what the game was, and they didn't hate it. Is it going to be our next game? Honestly, I hope not, because I think I can do better. But I think this prototyping showed how good of a stepping stone it can be to actually getting better at game development. And maybe I'm alone on this. Maybe you're really good at prototyping, but I don't know, like, I think a lot of game developers that I talk to as well that have their games and such, they have a lot of problems that could have been avoided if they did better prototyping, or if they did faster prototyping, or if they just did prototyping in general. Because that's something else. What's Skogville, for example, it's like we canceled that game because we spent 2 months of development on it. But at the end of the day, was it really a game? Or was it just a prototype that had gone out of hand and took like too many months? Because we never released a store page for it. We never really went super public with it. Like we said, like, yeah, we're working on this, but we never had that hard commitment. It's actually a game. And I think we just had a prototype that went over scope. And that is something that now, looking at the future, we're probably going to deal with a bit more. Now, before I talk about what we're going to do in the future and maybe some more stuff that you can learn about this, there's a lot of benefits to prototyping. That's why every YouTuber, even if they may not do it themselves, including us, says, hey, you should prototype more. You should validate your hook. You should validate, is your game fun? Does it feel nice? All of that. And only then commit on, hey, I'm gonna make this yes or no. The benefit, of course, yeah, is clear. You're not gonna spend probably years of time working on something that actually isn't fun and the mechanics don't make sense, and you're going to spend a whole bunch of time on it and nobody's gonna want it and you're gonna have to give up anyway. That's what happened in our case because we didn't prototype enough. But I think there are some downsides as well. I think now that I suddenly have that power of choosing for myself, oh, I'm gonna make this, I finally understand shiny object syndrome. I finally understand, what do you mean you have issues working on the same project for 9 months in a row? Because for me, there was no other option. It didn't matter that I didn't like Forge Industry or Guild Architect or whatever. It's like, what am I gonna do? Make another game? Yeah, fat chance, Marnix. Now I can, and now I do have to stop myself sometimes and find that balance of, okay, look, I have to work on Overtime Anomaly. Back then I also had to work on Magical Girl Guardians, I have to make these videos, and now on top of that, I wanna make more prototypes for some more game ideas that I have. And it's like, cool, but something's gonna have to give, and right now my priority shouldn't be making flashy new prototypes, even though it is objectively fun, I understand that now. I think that is something that is a bit tricky, and I think the only way to prevent that from happening is being like, nope, we're not gonna be doing this right now, we're just gonna wait with it. And it's a bit easier in my case because I'm not a solo developer, because I have actual downtime where I have to wait on Thomas or William because they're like, yeah, yo, I'm gonna use the main game scene or whatever. And because Git is miserable for merging and game scene together and whatever. And they're like, look, just don't touch it. And I also have that video backlog. So it's like, okay, I have time now. I have a very limited period of time, few days, few hours, whatever. Let's bang out a prototype. And if you can do that, that's fine. But I don't think it ever makes sense, once you've committed to a game idea, to just start more prototyping. That's also why I don't like game jams, for example, because shiny object syndrome, it's a real thing and you can avoid it pretty easily. You just have to take those steps. And that's the problem as well that I kind of asked myself with Magical Girl Gardens, because okay, it's one thing to spend time on it. Now that I know that, hey, I can prototype and I can make these things, do I spend too much time daydreaming of other ideas, so to say, and second guessing the stuff we're already working on? That's that whole sunk cost fallacy then of, am I spending too much time on a project that I maybe don't have full faith in? But should I finish it still? Or am I just, my brain is being tickled once again by that shiny object syndrome because I got 7 cool new game ideas in the last week. And I want to do something with that because it's all like piled up into me. What I've done now, this is my little side thing once again, and it's been working pretty well, is I have this document now, or like multiple documents, where I do that same process again. I get it out of my system, basically, whenever I get an idea. Guess, hey, you gotta cook anyway, right? So whenever I have that shiny new idea, I just fully think it out. Then once again, working together with ChatGPT and the voice feature, I fully talk through this through. And either I find out through talking to it with ChatGPT that, look, this isn't a good idea. There are too many flaws, too many pitfalls. There's too many things that I probably won't be able to get working, in which case I understand that the game is dumb and I'm not going to spend more time on it. Or it turns out that, hey, this might be a potentially good idea. I work out some of the kinks. And then once again, I summarize it. I make one big game design document for it and I put it somewhere and I forget it. And this is one thing that I don't know, it's like self-improvement YouTubers talk about it often, of like why journaling also works so well is the moment you write something down, whether that's physical, like ideally physical, but also like just storing it somewhere. You take it out of the RAM in your brain basically and you just shove it away. It doesn't really bother me anymore. So if that's something that you're struggling with, maybe this is something that you can try out yourself as well. If you're always constantly like getting new game ideas, just think it out. Like for like an hour or whatever, go through some options and whatever, use your favorite LLM to be your sparring partner, and then write it down and then move on. And I know this is easier said than done, but this is in my case at least how I've been experiencing it. Once I write something down, I honestly don't really think about it that much anymore. As long as it's like only stuck in here, in my brain, in that random access memory, it's gonna keep bouncing around and it's gonna keep nagging for attention until I give it attention and write it out. And I don't wanna do further prototyping on it yet even. But I just want to know that, hey, I have it stored, I have the core gameplay loop written down somewhere. Now let's get back to business on the games that we're actively working on right now. And then a final thing to my approach, but I don't know, is this prototyping related? Is this just being a bad programmer? There's a lot of approaches here. Is that I'm not really certain how scalable this approach is. Because like I said, this is like, what if Thomas gets hit by a Zamboni and does in fact tragically die? Is that gonna happen? I don't think so. But I think also it's still hopium for me to right now think that I can make a full game myself with my limited coding knowledge and support by ChatGPT and DeepSeek and whatever. But especially in our case where we're working in teams, the prototypes I write, maybe it's even a good thing, honestly, are so bad or like so slapped together that you can't really use them for production ready games. Like you can't, there's so many things that are going to explode in your face if you keep developing on it. But I think what we did then was really well with my virtual friend is, okay, Thomas was like, hey, look, this UI is really good. And I already have an idea of the vision that I had for the game because I had that prototype. He just took the UI, nuked basically all of the code that I had written for like managing the outfits, managing the characters and all of that. And I was like, okay, now an actual programmer, me, well, not me, but Thomas, is going to re-implement it. And he already had something to work on. It made it a lot easier for him to get started on that as well. So maybe that's a good thing. I'm not fully sold on that one. It's also something that's only a problem if you're really working in teams, because if I give my code to William, like William has a much higher quality standard for code as well than Thomas. For Thomas, it's like, I'm lazy. If it works and it's like not inherently flagrantly bad and like, you know, really dumb, it's fine. For William, it's like, okay, it needs to be nicely documented. It needs to be nicely, like, it needs to be written in a very efficient way, a really clean way and all of that. He would get an aneurysm if he looks at my code, which is like a mesh of stuff that I wrote and then some AI generated code, and it's very inconsistent or whatever, but it works for a prototype. And I think that is one thing that I also talk about. We never did this for Forge Industry. The first game we ever made is we had that rushed prototype that we made in our little weekend game jam, and then we just kept building on it. I think if you can learn that, look, the code that we write now for our prototype is really bad, and that's fine. We just want to figure out, does it work and is it fun? I think that can save you in the long run maybe a lot of time, because you already have to think out what are some of the mechanics I'm gonna have. Like, I didn't know when I started how I was going to implement outfits for my virtual friend, for example. But throughout the development, I realized that, okay, outfits are actually kind of an important part. And the way that I implemented in the proof of concept wasn't the best way, by how I linked it to a character, and then the character had like accessories and then main clothes. But I could talk to Thomas of like, hey, look, this is how I implemented it. I don't think this is a good way. Let's rethink this for the full game. And that's really powerful. You don't get the chance often to do that full refactor, because if you're refactoring code that has, like, you know, your code base is already a few months old, you're once again going to be miserable because there's so many more things breaking versus just getting it right from the moment you start the code base of your full game. So those are some things that I've also been realizing. How are we going to be taking this forward? Because right now we're less than 1 month away from launching Overtime Anomaly. That's normally going to be our next release, I think on March 7th or 6th, one of those 2 days. I don't remember exactly, but then we're going to release Overtime Anomaly. And William has been, you know, poking some questions of like, hey, what's next? Do you have an idea or something? And I told him like, look, right now, don't worry about it. Because this is something as well, we're getting more freedom to not have to release a game and then next day immediately start something new. We can do some post-launch support, especially if Overtime Anomaly does decently. We know we'll have a financial buffer to kind of have a few weeks of unproductive work, where maybe the stuff we do isn't going to be used in final project. But I think it's not the move anymore that I now start dreaming of an idea, making a game design document, and in the moment that Overtime Anomaly comes out, and then I give that big load game design document to William, and I'm like, okay, now make this. Because once again, we run into those problems of he doesn't fully understand my vision, all of that. I'm just going to tell him, look, take 2 or 3 weeks now, I think ideally like 3, and make 1 prototype every week. And then we have our Bite Me Core meetings every Friday. That's how we call it. It's just a meeting with me, Thomas, and William, where we talk about, hey, what have we been doing? And like, we often show the games to each other. And look, just every Bite Me Core, come with some prototype, and they don't have to be great, but just so we can validate a bit more, are these ideas good, before we just blindly jump into okay, we're going to making wheelchair pizza time or whatever. So we can actually think a bit more about, okay, should we make Journey to the Peak, or should we make something else of my game ideas, or William's game ideas, for example? What do we as a team think has the best vision, has good marketability, has a good hook and all of that? And figure that out now before we just go in completely and be like, okay, yeah, we're gonna make another Magical Girl Guardians. I hope that by doing this approach, we're not going to have to cancel games anymore, because the games, when we start development for realsies, are actually kind of validated already, that we know they're going to be decent. The gameplay loop is going to be fun, and we're not going to run into that issue like we're gonna have with Guild Architect, for example, where we were 4, 5, 6 months deep in development, and that core loop of getting the quest, grading it, stamping it, and then doing the quest management, it still wasn't fun. And then you have to make those decisions of, look, we have to cancel this. And that sucks, because then we suddenly spent 6 months on it, whereas we could have just spent a few weeks on prototyping multiple ideas to a certain degree, and then going with one that we as a team feel right. So this is a bit of an update on how I've been experiencing the entire, prototyping thing. I'm curious, how much do you really prototype, if you're being honest with yourself? Or do you, just like us, have a game idea and you're like, fuck it, this is a good game idea, we're gonna go for it? I'm really curious. Leave me your comments, down below, or ideally head on over to our Discord. There's a Patreon insider channel where the true homies reside, and it's just much easier to have that direct communication between us. Apart from that, thank you very much, of course, for your support. Things like this Patreon and your support on here make us also have kind of that option of being like, hey, we can take a few weeks off of just blindly making games and actually focus on what are we going to do next. Let's prototype this a bit more, let's think this out a bit more before we just commit to something else. So thank you very much from that. That's all I really have to say. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!